A couple of notes on MTSS before we get into the bingo game. The way that our center talks about MTSS may be a bit different from other centers or other MTSS essential components that you've been exposed to. And so I just want to note a couple of things in the way that we're talking about it. We're talking about it as a framework for improving instruction and improving whole school environments for all students. And that's in part because of our disposition toward that notion of building neighborhood schools that have capacity for all the diversity of learners that may come to that neighborhood school. We also want to acknowledge that part of making MTSS works includes reconfiguring your service delivery models. So this is on page 19 of your PowerPoint handout. When I talk about service delivery models, that's not just a special ed endeavor, right? It's also your staffing arrangements for all educators within your system. And a good colleague of mine, Michael Greco, wrote an article recently called Precarious or Purposeful, and it was service delivery models on the edge. And rethinking particularly paraprofessional utilization within our schools and having an eye toward collaborative teaching and co-teaching arrangements. And a couple of things in that article, which if you Google Greco, G-I-A-N-G-R-E-C-O, Greco, and you put in there precarious and purposeful, and don't ask me to spell those. The article is available from his website directly. It's also within our Swift guide. And in the article, he lays out some of the research we have on utilization of paraprofessionals. And this speaks to one of our beliefs of MTSS, and that is the most expert provider should be with the students with the greatest need. And so often for our kids with greatest needs, they're matched with paraprofessionals. And I have nothing against paraprofessionals. All hail for what winds up on their plate. And they're not the most expert provider when it comes to some content areas, unless they've received some very specific training and job-embedded coaching. So we want to acknowledge that. So he took a data-based approach. He researched a lot of schools in Vermont. And he took a data-based approach to saying, all right, if you have this number of students and you have this number of teachers, and you might want to think about having this number of special education teachers certified and this distribution of whether you call them classroom assistants, paraprofessionals, instructional assistants within that system for a collaborative teaching model. And he laid out an elementary model and a middle school model within that article. And I know he's working hard on high school questions as well. So we're acknowledging that that kind of service delivery framework behind it also needs to shift. It's not just about the kind of what you see, but it's about what's behind the curtain. Also, we want to integrate and align our resources with those shifts in staffing and service delivery models. So that means a whole school schedule may need to shift as well. We were doing some work in Cecil County, Maryland, and we were getting some pushback from some of our schools there, and part of the pushback was, we're trying to implement something that our schedule won't allow us to do. And we, principals, building leaders, don't have control over our school-wide schedules. Those are determined at central office. So instead of going to central office and going, boo, we said, here's a barrier that's getting in the way. You all have this shared vision, but it means schedules are going to have to shift as well. Can you create some flexibility? Principals made that request, and they got the flexibility, and they were able to try out some different practices within their buildings. In part, because the district was on board, they could align and focus their attention on what was the best next step to take in the implementation effort. So they were also able to look across schools to say, all right, schedules are a common issue, let's do some thinking. Let's look across schools and find out what are the other kind of priorities for training, for competence development that are common across buildings that we can start to invest in. And remember, we want to invest in not just training, but also job-embedded coaching so we can get to that high implementation rate. So the district had to pull back and say, you know, we send a lot of people to a lot of workshops. We bring in a lot of trainers, but we're not as investing on our coaching. Let's up that. Let's shift that. If we can be really clear about what we're trying to implement, we can focus and align our resources to actually get closer to full implementation. And that doesn't, just happen in a couple of months. That takes a few years. We're braiding into our discussions of MTSS what we've learned from 40 years of inclusive practices, right? So again, if the evidence says we have no comparative study that shows greater benefit by pulling these kids out, then let's figure out what the design of the school-wide MTSS would be so that they're in from the get-go. We're not talking about this specifically as identification for special ed, although it can be leveraged that way, but that's not the focus for us when we start talking about the school-wide multi-tiered system. And this is not only, as I stated before, about struggling students, but about those who need greater academic challenge as well. Questions about those kind of assumptions behind what we're giving you? The intent of this bingo game is to give you an initial introduction to the 14 components of MTSS as we're currently describing them in our most recent practice profile. A practice profile takes a given practice, whether it be a multi-component practice like MTSS, or a more focused practice like check-in, check-out, differentiated instruction, and lays out what are essential components for that practice. And then gives you a profile of what those components look like when they're fully in place according to a gold standard of fidelity, developing, and when you're just starting. So it gives you a bit of a rubric for thinking about where am I at. So the intent of a practice profile is to be able to identify your current status of implementation and then figure out what the next best step is for change. Right? So it's a direct lead to your action planning. So we're going to use bingo to get into the practice profile. And your bingo cards are actually going to double as the profile of a school's implementation of MTSS. So there are, I believe, 8 profiles out here in the audience. You have a number at the bottom of your profile, 1 through 8. And different school profiles, and I'll put that in quotes, have different strengths of things that are highly in place, some things that are developing, and some things that we would maybe generously say are starting. So, be choosing your marker. Will you do the M&Ms? Will you do a pen? Will you do a highlighter? Will you do only the blue M&Ms for the first column and the green M&Ms for the second column? Or do you have a different strategy there? Figure out what that's going to be. You're going to compare what's written on your bingo card with what's on the screen. The categories that you see on your bingo card are going to match the color categories that are going to be at the top of my screen. If you are colorblind, please refer to the text, not the color. That's fine. It's built in a universal way. If it matches exactly, then you can mark it as in place. If it only partially matches, hold back, keep waiting. You're not there yet. You'll notice that in the center of your bingo card, instead of giving you a free space, we've given you a challenge space. So if you can answer that question and name somebody who's caused you to reflect on your practice, you can go ahead and mark that space. If you call bingo, when our staff members come to your table, they will expect you to name somebody. So either get really creative or write that baby down now. If you get 5 in a row, 5 up and down, 5 across, 5 diagonal, you can yell bingo. When you yell bingo, we will applaud. We are happy for you. Raise your hand and keep it up because a center staff person is going to come and give you a ticket for the fact that you've just won bingo. And the tickets can be exchanged after the game for those bags over there, which are filled with a mix of additional goodies for you, some Swift Center swag, cups and mugs and hats and all kinds of fun stuff in there. So if you get bingo, no 4 corners, Four corners is not in my repertoire of bingo-ness. You can all feel free to applaud. Your table facilitator, your staff member, is going to come over and give you a bingo ticket to trade in for some bag in the back. But you're going to keep playing. Right? So you can have all that excitement and want to go get your bag, but it's going to be delayed gratification. You've got your tickets, you're guaranteed a bag. You're going to hold that in because you want to finish figuring out where is my school at. I want to get the full profile of this school that's in front of me. At the end, after we've gone through all of the slides, you're going to compare your bingo card results to the MTSS practice profile that we will hand out to you. Got them up here. We'll make sure that those get to you for the end of the game. And you're going to go through and compare your profile with the MTSS practice profile to figure out what's the status of implementation of MTSS in this school. And what are their strengths? What are they doing really well? In our center, we believe in a strengths-based approach. We want to find out what you're doing well and how to leverage that for your next endeavor. It doesn't mean we're just looking across to see what's not in place. Okay, let's focus there next. It's more nuanced than that. If you're really good at family engagement and you're trying to up universal support, is there something we can leverage to bring those two things together? Okay? And then you're going to pick the next best priority for them. As you look at that profile, what would you recommend if you were their consultant coming in and saying, okay, here's the status of everything in your system. Here's where I would put your next set of energy. Because we know we can't get it all in place at once. And then you can exchange your token for a party. There are, how many are we giving away? 20? 20-ish? 19, 15, 10? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 18, all right, okay. So get ready. Everybody understand the directions? Any questions? Here we go. First bingo item under the category of universal support. And you're going to see bolded words here. You're looking for the bolded words. The school or district have prioritized teaching approaches which show evidence of high effect, high impact on learning. So prioritized teaching approaches, high effect, high impact. Universal support. Check it off if it's there. Next one, intensified support. The key word you're looking for is that there's a whole day support plan included in the intensified support aspect. Right? The school is a process for identifying and selecting research-based ways to intensify instruction, intervention, and support, as shown through a whole day support plan for students. Integrated collaborative teams, it's the first column on the left. Site-based school and district leadership teams lead and monitor implementation of MTSS. So if you have lead implementation under integrated collaborative teams, go ahead and check that off. Decision-making with data. Notice I put decision-making first. The data serves the decisions you're trying to make, not the other way around. And here it is. Teams use continuous improvement process with simultaneous processing of student outcome, fidelity of implementation, and capacity data. So continuous improvement using outcome, fidelity, and capacity data. And those leadership teams are engaging in that process at least twice per year to monitor and make adjustments. Continuous improvement using outcome, fidelity, and capacity data at least 2 times a year. So that dilemma over here of that team, right, that's what they're going to be doing. Next one, additional support. The school has identified additional support that are research-based and they supplement universal instruction. They don't replace it, they supplement universal instruction. So additional, research-based, supplement universal. You have to have all three. If you have additional and supplement, you're not completely there yet. Universal support. Prioritize standards, focus instruction. And the process for identifying those prioritized standards included involvement of general and specialized educators. Prioritize standards, focus instruction, and the process to identify those standards involved general and specialized educators. Universal support. We address learning variability in the design of curriculum and instruction. Right? Universal design for learning, UDL, right up front. I see some cards that are already close. You're itching. Here it comes. Intensified support. You're going to have a process for identifying and selecting ways to intensify that incorporates student and family voice in decision making. Right? Once we get to that most intensified support level, we want to make sure we're engaging families and students. If you're only engaging families on your bingo card, you're not there yet. Okay. Integrated collaborative teams. Those leadership teams are involving key stakeholders in decisions. Bingo. Hold your hands up, baby. Hold them up. Staff members are going to be coming and checking. I'll start checking up front. Mary. Okay, yes. You're not there yet? Okay, so she's confirmed. She's good. I'll take a ticket for her. How many have we handed out thus far? How many do we have left? Is that it? That's all of them. Okay. So, for the rest of you who have not yet yelled bingo yet, you can still yell and we'll still applaud. We'll give you our love. Okay, here we go. Let's find out the full implementation status at your buildings. Additional support has defined decision guidelines to determine when to initiate, adjust, or end support. If you're only using those guidelines to initiate, but not to adjust or end, then you don't get a spot. Right? So often we'll send kids off for additional support and they never come back. We never end it. We just keep on providing that. Right? And you want to have a decision guideline for that, right? We're kind of standardizing our decision making here. It doesn't mean it's necessarily driven by the data, but it's based in the data, right? But your professional judgment as educators comes to bear on that decision. It's not just a simple cut score on dibbles, right? We're saying, what do we know about this kid's history? What can we anticipate next, right? So it's based in those decisions, but there are guidelines to help with that. Decision making with data. Universal screening is completed for all students in the first 2 months of school and 3 times a year. Summaries of levels of risk are used to develop plans to respond to needs. And while it's not on any of the cards, I will note here, we of course are also checking to make sure that we did those universal screeners with integrity. Right? We did them as intended there. Fidelity, integrity, are we doing things as we intend to do them? This one's hard for lots of places, and we're struggling across the country on this one when it comes to those kiddos with the most significant disabilities who don't have a way to communicate. Right? How am I getting a screening measure on a kid who's nonverbal if my eye is on fluency? Right? So this is pushing us. If we're saying we're really going to build it for all, what's screening look like for kids as they come into high school, for kids who are nonverbal? Right? We've got to find some indicators that we can look to, and there are models out there for that. Intensified support targets academic need and function of behavior. Right? Got to have both here. And you have the decision guidelines to initiate, adjust, and end support. Right? We target to academic need and function of behavior by use of diagnostic assessments, functional behavioral assessments. We're not just kind of smacking on the tier 3 behavior support. We want to go after the function that's underneath the behavior. And when it comes to diagnostic assessments, I'm not saying diagnostics in terms of diagnosing a label. What I'm saying is diagnosing what's preventing the student from performing at the next level up. What's the core thing underneath? It's not all of reading that I'm just going to triple dose you in. There's a focus area that's probably really holding you back. That's where I'm going to invest. And it should raise up other aspects of your reading. Integrated collaborative teams attend to the alignment of initiatives to promote one coherent system. Alignment, one coherent system. Huge capacity issue in most schools, right? Teachers just feel like we've got 80 different initiatives soaring at us every day, and we're left there in the classroom rolling up our sleeves trying to figure out what to do next. So we want our leadership teams to be helping us with that braiding of initiatives and alignment of initiatives. Additional support targets academic need and function of behavior. Universal support. Prioritized teaching approaches address our historically marginalized and underperforming populations. Right? So not only do we have high-effect teaching strategies, we've also kept in mind cultural responsivity as we've identified those and incorporated that in. We're thinking about high engagement strategies for our kiddos from poverty, as an example. Decision making with data, matching students to supports, using a decision making protocol or guideline that leverages data with consideration for academic, behavior, and social emotional factors, at least academic and behavior here for credit on your profile. And while it's not on any of your profiles, I said this earlier, with attention to having the most expert providers matched with the kiddos with the greatest need. In our work in Maplewood Elementary School, we had a small enough staff where we did a resource strengths activity staff-wide. And we had teachers, general and specialized educators, writing down on Post-it notes things that they were good at. I'm really good at teaching this component of reading. I'm really good at teaching that component of math. Put them up on the wall. Here's all the stuff you're really good at. Great, now let's put up on the wall the needs of our kids. And let's start to match. Right? So instead of thinking about by title, let's do it by strengths. Okay. Intensified support. We're intensifying that instruction intervention by supplementing Universal. Of course, we're making adaptations and modifications within Universal, and then we're giving some dose in addition to the Universal if we're saying it's intensified support. Integrated collaborative teams. At that grade level and on other teaming structures, we've got both general and specialized educators who are meeting at least twice a month to monitor and plan that tiered support. And if they're planning on intensified support, they're including family and external collaborators as appropriate. Decision making with data. Progress monitoring is completed monthly for students getting additional supports in any area, weekly for all students getting intensified supports in any area. And of course, we're checking that we're delivering that with integrity, fidelity. How many of you are already doing the progress monitoring monthly, at least monthly for kids getting additional supports? Okay, most of you are already doing that. What about weekly for intensified supports? Most of you are also doing that. Okay, great. Universal support, all students have grade level general education classroom as their primary placement, meaningfully participating in that classroom's universal academic and behavior instruction. More love around the room. Excelente. We're going to trust you. You got double bingo. Yeah, we're out of cards, so we're just giving the love. Good job. Okay. And you know, we're probably approaching a day where we're not going to label the classroom as the general education classroom. That's just the classroom where we have the full variability of our learners present with natural proportions. Intensified support. School uses intensified support for reading, math, and behavior, right? It's one thing to know that we have it and we have evidence-based practices, but we actually use it with our kiddos. Integrated collaborative teams. And I'd actually leverage this to answer somebody's question earlier today. General and specialized educators have shared understanding and agreement with key principles and beliefs. And so as an example here, do I believe that all students can learn and achieve at high levels? If I have that belief and you have a different belief and you have a different belief, then we don't have a unified system yet. If I'm thinking one way about behavioral supports in terms of functions, and you're thinking about them in terms of them being in the kiddos, then we've got a disconnect in what we're believing, and so our practices are not going to be consistent. So what are we doing to engage our faculty, our staff, our administrators in conversations about what do we think? What do we believe about teaching and learning? What's behind all of this for us? Do we believe that we can actually prevent some of those combined academic and behavioral challenges for kiddos? Additional support. School uses those reading, math, and behavior supports at all grade levels. Several of our schools might get additional support in place in certain grades, but not in others, right? It's because it's a process. You know you're doing it with integrity, with fidelity, once we've got those available across all grades and all content areas. Decision making with data. Within the past year, fidelity measures indicate that our support system and essential components are implemented as intended. And that would be across all arenas of support. Right? So if you're familiar with PBIS, you're familiar with the SET, the BOQ, now the tiered fidelity inventory. Those are examples of fidelity measures. If you have core reading or math programs, they probably come with fidelity measures that allow you to do a check. Is that data showing that you're implementing with high fidelity? Decision making with data, again, adjusting and problem solving is done using a protocol. It's based on the student's response to the support that we're providing, as identified by data, with consideration for academics, behavior, and social emotional factors. There are some kiddos where we say, okay, we have a standard approach here for you that we're going to start to deliver, and we see some response, but not quite enough, not quite what we expected. So we sit down and engage in some plan, do, study, act cycle to understand what's happening for that kiddo. It's not always a one-to-one match. Here's your need, here's the intervention, we're good to go. Right? They're human. They come dynamically pre-programmed with lots of questions for us to figure out. What's important is that we're engaged in the process of the problem solving. Okay, that's all 14 components. I know it felt like much more, didn't it? All right, check your bingo card. And we're going to hand out the MTSS practice profile so that you can see the full gold standard for each of those essential components. And what you want to start doing is identifying the strengths, things that are fully in place for your school's profile, and what the needs are. And you're their consultant. You're their advisor. You're going to come in and say, you know, if it were me, here's where I'd put my resources and my attention. A great mentor of mine said, energy follows attention. Energy follows attention. So where I put my attention is where my resources and efforts are going to go. Right? So as a person with shifting attention, that's a particularly important thing for me. Right? Where I put my attention is where my energy is going to go. So we want to put their attention on the right next stuff to get fully in place. So what would you pick as their priority for change? I'm going to give you probably 15 minutes because you're going to be going through and looking at each of the 14 components and mapping out some change. So I'm going to put 15 minutes up, but I'll check in 10 to see where you're at. Feel free to consult with your neighbors, get their input. It appears there might have been some confusion in the directions, so we have some overachievers in the audience, and that is okay. The profile was your bingo card profile. Some people went ahead and started scoring their own schools. How many of you scored your own schools? Excellent, you just did the next activity. So it's okay, in either way, you've just gotten a flavor for going through the profile to figure out how do I figure an implementation status. Either way, you're good. You got the basic skill that we were looking for. So let me let's do a little check for kind of understanding, because now that you've read through them and kind of thought about them in relationship to a current status, it may have made you raise questions about whether or not you really understand all 14 items. So let's check for understanding. On a blank piece of paper, list 1 through 14. List 1 through 14, and then you're going to go through the practice profile, the multi-page handout, for which there are 14 components. Just read each component in its gold standard description. And I want you to just kind of reflect for a second. Do I really understand it? Do I understand it well enough given I just read the dang thing? Check. Or, you know what, I need him to clarify something about this. So you can give it a plus, a check, or a minus. -1, 0, +1. I don't care what you call them. But go through all 14 items in the multi-page handout we just gave you. Just read back through it. And let me know if I need to go back and clarify any of the 14 items for you. Everybody just about done there? A few people have about 4 more to rate. For those of you who are all the way through checking to make sure you understand the items, you can get your Kahoots in order. We are above 55. We're going to take that as good enough for feedback on this next section. And what I'm going to do is just going to give you a number and then the rating scale. You're just going to put in what your rating was. Right. 14 questions, 14 components, 10 seconds to enter your answers. Component number 1, where did you put yourself? Plus, check, or minus? Component number 1, plus, check, or minus? Okay, mostly pluses. We've got just 3 minuses on that one. Okay, let's take a look at the next one. Item number 2. It's going to be same lineup, plus, check, or minus? Yeah, you're all acting faster this time. There we go. Okay. So we're doing good there. Item number 3. Excellent. All righty, lots of understanding there. So only 2. Okay. Item number 4. Okay. Item number 5. Okay. A little split on that one. Item number 6. Okay. Lots of understanding on that one. Item number 7. Okay. Item number 8, intensive. Item number 9, first part of decision making here. Okay. Item number 10. Okay. Item number 11. Okay. Item number 12. Okay. Item number 13. Okay. All right. And item number 14. Okay. Excellent job. That's really helpful feedback. School and district have prioritized a set of teaching approaches which have high effect, address learner variability, and consider historically marginalized and underperforming populations. So the gold standard looks at the prioritized teaching approaches which have high effect, right? So that's that looking at the barometer of effectiveness straightforward. Then addressing learner variability through universal design for learning, and then incorporating approaches specific to historically marginalized or underperforming populations. So if we think about this item under prioritized approaches, I refer to it as a playbook, which is lingo I picked up from Jim Knight, for those of you who are familiar with the work of Jim Knight. He has actually a book out around high effect teaching practices. And I believe he reviews, I want to say, like 12 different practices within his book. High effect, high impact instruction. Marzano, classroom instruction that works, and he's evolved since then with some newer models, but the classroom instruction that works framework would be an example of an instructional playbook, a set of prioritized approaches. Would be another example. Check, check. She's like, got it, did it. And then, so those are examples of instructional playbooks. And it doesn't mean that you would necessarily just adopt what those people are saying, but that you would be having that conversation within your school, right? You'd say kind of across the school, what do we agree are high effect practices that we want all teachers to use? Yes, of course, there are going to be lots of other approaches. We want to make sure that this core set of high impact strategies are being used across our school days. If there's not an agreed upon approach to what direct instruction is and should look like in the building, then that's worth a check, right? So my progress monitoring here with you is an essential component of direct instruction, that you stop and check, and if you don't have 85 to 90% of the students with you, you don't move ahead. you don't move on. You stop and you reteach. So, and you clarify as needed. So that's just an example of one component of a high effect practice that we'd want to make sure was happening with fidelity within our buildings. When I think about underperforming populations, there's several books out there on teaching with poverty in mind, or engaging the poverty in mind, engaging the mind from poverty. Thinking about what are the particular instructional approaches I might want to make sure that I'm paying attention to for kids who are coming from high poverty areas. So when I was putting up that data about those Title I schools, in particular, those are schools who've been paying attention to high engagement strategies, as an example of a strategy you'd want aligned with a particular subgroup or population. In Vermont, they're doing a lot with trauma-informed care, because they're finding a high proportion of their students are coming from or experiencing trauma. And that needs to be factored into how we're designing our classroom instruction. So it's not just high effect across the board, it's also with an eye toward what's the variability that we can predict, that we can design for in advance. Are there other clarifiers I can provide there? Specific questions that people had related to that one? Okay. Hope that's more clear. Let's take a look at number 8. This was the intensified support one. So let me ask first, are there any particular questions about, it's this part, out of these 5 things, I don't understand this one over here. Any particular focused questions that people have? If not, I'll just kind of rerun through it. It's the number 5 part for you? The whole day plan? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I don't want to start searching for those slides right now. So one thing that I would be paying attention to in terms of a whole day plan, so the example I gave earlier was if I've got a kiddo reading 2 grades off level, I've got to look at the texts that they've got access to all day long, right? If I've got a kiddo who's easily triggered by task demands from adult males, I've got to look across the day, when does this kiddo come in contact with adult males that may be placing task demand on them, right? It's not just an additive model of, like, let me just give you some intervention around anger management with males, right? Like, it's not that kind of fix approach. It's a much more of a fit approach across the day.
My question was whether it was kid-specific or class-wide.
So if we're talking about intensified supports, the support plan is kid-specific. It's going to have implications possibly for the whole class. Yeah, and that's where that team has to make that decision, right? So I do a lot of work with kids with more significant disabilities, particularly those with cognitive and communication disability labels, and we have to think about what are the supports you need to participate in whole instruction, and like in Jack's case, we were still also doing some catch-up on some components from content area that he hadn't gotten before. So it was this both and approach. He needs a whole day support plan. We've got to give him a really clear visual schedule as he transitions throughout his entire day. If we know there are certain aspects of his day that are not going to be directly tethered to his personal life, then we've got to do a little pre-teaching across the day to make that work for him. Really good question. Am I clarifying?
Yeah.
Is there more? Is that enough? She's like, yeah, really good, thanks. Okay. All right. Any other specific questions on number 8? Those are really good questions. Thank you. Actually, one more comment on the whole day plan. We think about the whole day plan also with an eye toward intensifying support across the day. So if I'm doing classroom differentiation during a math lesson, and I'm differentiating maybe by content across my flexible groups in my room, I'm making sure that this kiddo is going to go to the group where we're going to work on the content standard where he needs the extra beef up, right? That's another example of that whole day plan. It's not just flexible grouping, but I'm going to match him with a content area within that flexible group. And let's jump to number 12. And this is the item around matching. So it's not matching students to what we have in the closet. It's matching based on need, is the big shift here. School personnel ensure students are matched to additional intensified support that addresses their specific need. Right, so go back to George Sugai's profile there. I don't want to give Theora support in basketball that she doesn't need because she's been labeled as a tier 3 kid, right? We want to match specific to the need. And particularly at the intensified level, my question is, what's holding you back from performing at the next level up? Versus, you need math, we got math. Let me just dump every math thing I can at you. And we're going to be using diagnostic assessments to pinpoint what that is that's holding you back, whenever appropriate. So functional behavioral assessment would be an example of a diagnostic approach to identifying need. So we have some agreed upon protocols for how our teams come together and look at that data to figure out the pinpoint. And we're putting together all the variables, all the different factors there for consideration in order to develop the best plan for you. Right? So I'm considering, even though you've got a high academic need, Dawn, I know that Stacy irks you, and even though she also has that same high academic need, I'm not going to put you two in the same group. That's consideration of those factors. Right? It's not saying, well, you both have that math need, so suck it up. Right? Because that's going to mess with the effect size of the intervention that we've got. And I think I've already babbled on a lot about the most expert providers. So let me stop there and see, are there specific questions about those 4 aspects of that gold standard? So the second number 1 is the process used to identify, prioritize, and supporting standards included objective selection criteria. So as educators went through the standards together, they weren't just saying, I like that one's pretty. They were saying, that represents some enduring understanding that I want to make sure that all kids have. That's a standard I can leverage across content areas, right? Investigating text, analyzing text for information. I can leverage that across lots of classes. And looking at readiness. So I might choose a standard that has other readiness factors underneath it as supporting standards, but my prioritized standards is going to collapse down those readiness indicators leading up to that standard. So I can focus on that standard and be paying attention to what are some of the foundational skills that would help you get there. So I can do that too versus holding that readiness standard aside as a separate standard. Is that making more sense? And if you'd like examples of how to go about prioritizing standards, Mike Schmoker's book, Focus, has a nice outline in it for how to do it. Mike Schmoker. Schmoker. And did we hit book number 3? Check. You got that one too? Great. Schmoker's got a nice, kind of easy, friendly outline. Marzano's group does really intensive work around prioritized standards and proficiency-based learning, proficiency scale development relative to your prioritized standards. It's just really intense work, but it's a crisp approach as another example. Schools where I've seen educators come together and do vertical and horizontal alignment of standards, those are rich conversations. You know, hand 32 reading standards to a bunch of teachers in elementary school and something good's going to happen. I mean, it's a party. So I really think that there's an opportunity for good conversations there. You know, do your 9th grade teachers know what's happening in 7th grade that's getting students ready? That's part of this conversation when you talk about prioritized standards. Good question. Any other questions on sub-item, the second item 1 under component 4? Having fun with that. Questions on other components that I can answer now for you? Yes, Mary.
I have a question on number 10.
How'd you say that? 10? Am I getting that right?
Number 10.
Number 10. All right, I'll get the lingo. I'm from New Hampshire. So we got different ways of saying things. I'm with you, though. I like that.
Let's stop laughing now. Okay, the effectiveness of tiered instruction. How do I know if it's effective? Is there a percentage or?
How do I know if the instruction's effective? Excellent question. Your check's in the mail, too. All right. We can only determine effectiveness if we have at least two sources of data. We need student outcome data and we need fidelity data. We got to have both, right? I can know that I'm making a difference. Look at my student outcome data. What we're doing obviously works. Well, what aspect of what you're doing is obviously working? And you only know that if you've got fidelity data, right? So if I look across my practice profile and I'm saying I got great outcome data, which parts of this are getting you that outcome data? You only know if you've got that finding in front of you. Because if there are components of, if there are a recommended set of components, but you find that out of these 10 components, really it's 8 that make the difference for your kiddos, then you don't have to worry about those other 2. But know which ones you're choosing to keep in and throw out based on the effect outcome-wise. And you only can do that if you've got the 2 sets of data with you, right? So I look at one of our principals developed a check-in, check-out practice profile, and it started to get a little long. He had like 24 items in there. And then he boiled it back down because he was like, okay, we've made check-in, check-out like too big to manage. And we got to get back to what are the essential components that really make the difference for our kiddos. Right? So it ended up actually being a nice professional learning opportunity as well as a fidelity measure. But you need 2 sources of data. Is that?
Well, I was looking for something more.
Okay, you'd like a different answer.
Yeah.
Ask again.
Perhaps.
Okay.
I was looking for something more definitive. I mean, so should 80% of your kids be able to leave Tier 2 according to your criteria if it's an effective intervention, or?
I'm not going to give you the right answer, Mary. Because so much of it's contextually bound, right? So as soon as I say to you, 80% of your kids getting Tier 2 support should be able to return to Tier 1 support in order to determine effectiveness, you're going to say, well, we're at 79, we're at 81. Is that good? Like, I'm not going to do that. But what I will say to you is, when you predict the student response, are you mostly getting that? And if so, what are the essential ingredients that are causing you to get your desired outcomes? Right? There's always going to be more for us to do. So we want to have an eye to what's the powerful stuff that makes the difference. Do more of that. And the stuff that really doesn't make the difference, let's start calling that out. Make room for other good stuff that's going to come. So I'm less concerned about what your kind of return rate is on your investment, right? Generally speaking. I want you, there's a great John Hattie quote. Let me see if I can just quickly find it. Hold on. He has a great quote about pushing teachers to be able to identify the context, the kind of when, where, and how that you're changing students' learning. You saw in those early charts where we talked about 80 to 90% would meet the expectations in Tier 1. Yeah, that would be an indicator of effectiveness. Yeah. I want you to know what it is that you're doing that's effective, not just that you're getting your desired outcome. Right? Because if I go up to Madison, New Hampshire, at Madison Elementary School, yes, 98% of their kids are passing the state test. Woohoo! Why? What is it you're doing that's getting that? And can we leverage that for the other 2% who are not? Right? It's more about knowing the conditions under which you're creating that effect. That's what we're looking for there. Some kids also are going to need some supports for certain things forever. So it's not really, are we moving everybody back to only Tier 1 support? That's not the question. Right? Some kids are going to continue to need support, and that needs to be okay. All right. If you've been following our work, you'll notice that this practice profile is different from our last one in many ways. We're learning and growing as well. You want cookies then quiz or quiz then cookies? Quiz then cookies? Oh my God, look at your faces. Okay. All right, no rewards before passing the quiz. So, since you've just had your clarifying questions about the components, you're ready to show me you're learning on a Kahoot. The four categories of this MTSS profile are teams, universal, additional, and intensive, decisions with data, assess, teach, test, repeat, integrated support, universal teams for PBIS, RTI, tier 1, 2, 3 assessment. Which are the four category names on the practice profile that you had at the top of your bingo? Actually, yeah, well, it's related to the bingo card, but the multi-page handout. That's right, teams, integrated teams, universal support, additional and intensive support, and then decisions with data. Which of the following is not part of universal? Specially designed instruction, coherent curriculum, prioritized standards, diagnostic assessment. Diagnostic assessment is not part of universal. Okay, so let me do a clarification here. Coherent curriculum, very much so part of universal. So 28 of you may have misread the question. It's okay. We'll do a reteach right now, though. We want a coherent curriculum, right? An evidence-based, coherent curriculum that helps us make sense of and teach to our prioritized standards. It's very much kind of at the heart of what we're looking for. Diagnostic assessment is what we use as we get into intensified support for kiddos. So that would be the best non-answer. Specially designed instruction can be provided across all support levels. We can provide SDI all day long in any arena of support. In fact, if you were to crosswalk specially designed instruction and differentiated instruction, you would see they have the exact same definitions in them. Content, methodology. All right, which of the following is part of additional support, is part of additional support? There is one best answer. Instruction or intervention as a supplement to universal. Oh, excellent. Which of the following is positively associated with intensified support? It was one of the clarification questions that we got, actually. A whole day support plan is. 50 of you got it. Excellent. MTSS decisions are made with data and assessments, data and guidelines, salt and vinegar, and IEP team. Which one's the best answer? Data and guidelines. Okay, we have a split here. So let's do a little clarifying, and we have two snarky people in the audience. I'm with you, I was thinking that one too. Assessments might provide for us a source of data. Our professional judgments may be a source of data. Systematic observations may be a source of data. The data alone isn't enough, though. We've got to be really clear about what decision we're trying to make and then have a protocol for how we go about making that decision. In a school-wide framework, we want to make sure that as educators, we're approaching this problem solving in similar ways. So we want an agreed upon set of guidelines for doing that allow us our professional judgment flexibility that we need and structure us up to make sure we're looking at the right data sources for the right decisions. Those should be agreed upon protocols, agreed upon guidelines. So the best answer actually is data and guidelines. Okay. Question 6 of 6. Fidelity means accountability, forgetful, consistent with research outcomes, doing something in the way we intended to do it. Fidelity is doing something in the way that we intended to do it. 38 of you got that. This is the trick one, so let me clarify here. If we do it with fidelity, as it's intended to be done according to the research, we're more likely to get the outcomes. Right? That's why we do it as intended. That's why we do it with fidelity, to get to those outcomes. But fidelity itself is not just consistent with the outcomes, because you may have gotten the outcomes from doing something different than what was intended. Okay. So again, it's that relationship between kind of what do we think is making the difference, what's actually making the difference for our kiddos. We want to get that precise. Alrighty, welcome back. This is the quote we were looking for before. Right, it's not about just asking, am I making a positive difference? It's about asking, how much impact on learning am I making? With who and under what circumstances? That's the effectiveness question. So the circumstances include, what components did I deliver? What essential ingredients were in what I just did that created the greater impact? Right, you're doing cooperative learning, there are 5 essential components. When I deliver all 5 of those, I get greater impact. Right, so it's understanding those circumstances under which you are making a greater difference. On our website, we have lots of different videos. I've pulled out just a couple for use today. Feel free to go poke around to look for more. The next one I want to work with you is called Whatever It Takes, and it has a focus on academic instruction, but there are also lots of components of MTSS evidenced in the video. So I want you to be thinking about what are those structures, what's the system behind what you're seeing, as well as what you're seeing. So, in your activity guide you see, I'm asking you, what evidence did you see consistent with the MTSS components that we just went over? Also, if you see something that's really cool that you're like, oh, I want to try that, please write down that practice. Absolutely. But right now, I really want your eyes on, am I seeing evidence of these MTSS components that we're looking at? We'll do an unpack of that, and then I want to move to talking about how they got there. I'm going to do a little bit about the how of implementation, which will include a look at a core set of what we call readiness indicators for larger scale change. And I'll hand that out. Those are district and school level indicators for leading the change process. And then I'll talk with you a little bit about kind of if I were to recommend where schools start. I'll talk about our Swift Center's theory of action relative to this MTSS practice profile. Save the good juice to the very end. All right, here we go. Let's take a look at this video. Components of MTSS.
Good morning, everybody. All right, now let's start doing our activities. Okay, you ready? What number is that? 2. 2, oh, that was an easy one. 1.
Whatever It Takes, a Swift film by Dan Habib.
I need everybody looking this way, crisscross, applesauce hands in the bucket, right? Okay, so what's the title of our story this week? A Bed for the Winter. That makes me think about the story that we read last week.
Well, you know, kindergarten is such a huge responsibility. People think it's like coloring and take a nap and, and snack, but no, you know, I set the foundation for the rest of their lives. So, you know, I take that responsibility very seriously.
Meet the needs.
I'm going to put it up here. Can everybody see it up here? All right. Now, what did we say this was called? A stump. What happened to this? What got cut down? A tree got cut down and it left a stump. Very good. Now,
this is a 98% free and reduced lunch school. It's a Title I school. So a lot of the kids come from a similar lower socioeconomic background. One of the things that's really interesting to me is the lack of oral language development, because that's the basis of reading. They don't talk very much because at home it's mostly business talk. Well, go put your shoes on, get your book bag. A snake slides through the grass. He has hungry black eyes. He stares at the dormouse. His tongue flicks in and out. The dormouse is trapped. She's too scared to move. But they don't have the enriching conversations that you would have in a more affluent household. Do you think this is the bottom of a tree? And I said that a tree trunk is the bottom of a tree, right? And so once I get the data, I can see who doesn't really know what they need to know coming into school. A tree trunk, very good. Thank you, I'm sorry. Last word. I try to differentiate my instruction based on what the data is telling me. Now, looking at that picture, do you think that this is going to be a story about make-believe or real animals? Real animals. Now, look back at... And so I try to make sure that I kind of think about that when I'm planning my lessons. You know, if it's an auditory learner or a visual learner or a kinesthetic learner, can they learn something from what I'm doing? Especially when I'm doing a whole group lesson, because everybody's looking at me at the same time.
An adjective is a word that describes a noun. A noun is a person, animal, place, or thing.
Some of the strategies or some of the scaffolds that I use are anchor charts and videos, technology, different programs. Anything I think would be helpful to them, I try to bring it into the classroom. My foster grandparent is Desi Larkin. She's a wonderful asset to our classroom.
You like that? Yeah, don't make it like that. You make it like that, okay? Yeah, that's good.
A lot of times she'd work with the kids who might need a little extra support or love or attention that I don't necessarily have because I have 20 kids in my classroom. So I give her specific assignments to work with 2 or 3 children whom I can identify as needing extra help.
And let's see what the other stuff was.
For so many places in education, special needs children and general education students were always looked at as separate entities. SWIFT combines them and focus on all the children.
Good job. Let's give her a mirror this morning. Click, click, click. Ooh, looking good.
Many school districts endeavor to do that, but true implementation with fidelity, that takes a lot of planning, a lot of training, a lot of strategizing, and SWIFT helps us do that. So it had to start from the top, and we had to have buy-in from the leadership.
As an instructional leader of the school, my top priority is making sure that we promote an environment of academic success, making sure that everyone is looking at the data, not the data just sitting on the shelf collecting dust, but digging in the data and figuring out how we can meet the needs of every single student.
Look at the data.
So the first one that we're going to start off with is what are clouds? So I need everybody to take that one out. And once you have it, eyes on me, please. Clouds form when water condenses in the sky. There are many different types of clouds. Clouds are an important.
Well, data is very important for us. I use data from exit tickets, so daily data. We use weekly data. We use bi-weekly, end of month, end of year, all that data. For exit tickets, for example, they help me to decide, okay, do I need to alter my lesson for tomorrow to meet the needs of these students because maybe they mastered this skill or maybe they didn't master the skill.
The water in the clouds start off as small droplets, and then they start to do what, Reindeers? They collect more water.
We also have students that are tested more frequently that are on progress monitoring, so we're able to see if those interventions and that extra help is really helping them to see if they're making growth.
So I'm going to give you a question that I want you to turn and talk with your partners with. I want you to discuss what are clouds. So you're going to have to look back at it, read over it, try to summarize those paragraphs to come up with that central idea.
Another way that I use that in the classroom, I've actually started to make sure the children are aware of where they are and set their own personal goals. They have one central place where they can also keep track of how well they're doing.
I think the main idea is about clouds because
one of the things that I have found is the students at Crenshaw are happy to know that their principal is monitoring their progress, monitoring when they don't do as well as they should. When they took the STAR assessment, they were coming up and down the halls to find me, to tell me, I grew 1 year. I grew a year and 5 months, or I grew 2 years. And so I was able to talk to them and congratulate them and tell them I knew you could do it.
Morning, morning. You guys good?
It's just a means of encouraging them and letting them know I'm paying attention and I want you to be successful and I'm going to push you until you give me what's inside of you.
So what we're going to do today is look at our data from our most recent progress monitoring. We're going to move the students on the data wall, kind of talk about the things that we've been doing, interventions that we feel like have worked, those things that have not worked so well. And then we're going to be giving you guys some strategies from another chapter in this book that talks about some specific things that we can be doing.
After each assessment that is given, we move students along that data wall based upon where they fail with regard to that particular assessment. We talk about what strategies for intervention have been used, what things we are finding effective, and then what things we're finding that are not so effective. Because if the things that we have done with them are not helping them indeed be successful, we have to change and do something that is going to help them be more successful. We have to dig deep and look at data to see where is this child's deficit and what are research-based instructional practices that are going to be best suited to help this student improve. And I tell the staff here all the time, students do not have to learn the way we teach. We have to teach the way they learn.
Swift gives us a structured model that's research-based. We're not trying to recreate the wheel. The multi-tiered instruction support, we're definitely seeing that come together. And so we want to create a system where we're meeting the needs of all the children and not just a segmented group.
Exactly.
I see that the issue with children with IEPs being segregated as a civil rights issue.
So why would the author include a picture or illustration to a text?
You can do a prediction.
You can make predictions with pictures. They give us that vivid or visual image in our head of what we're reading about. So who would like to read the first paragraph?
If I were a parent that had a child with a disability, I would want to make sure that my child would be challenged to the highest degree. There has to be a quality of learning in that classroom and not just placing a child in a classroom for socialization.
What do you think is going to happen at this point in the story? Write it down on paper.
And so we want to make sure that learning in our district is inclusive for all children.
Multiple access points.
When I'm planning for a lesson, I try to give my students multiple access points. This involves different ways of visualizing the material. I know some students learn better by reading, so I make sure that there's an element of reading in there. Some students will learn better if they write it afterwards. Some students need to see it. Some students need to touch it. Sometimes it may feel like a circus, but it's trying to meet the needs of every student in the class.
You will be getting a circle magnet to hold the train or bus onto the Newton scale. This is a new piece of equipment you're going to learn to use. What it does is measure force.
I've worked with Ashley for 2 years now. I taught her in 7th grade science and now in 8th grade science. It was difficult for her to learn how to use the eye gaze machine. Once we started doing that, I started making notebook files so she can look at and switch between the screens. The eye gaze has definitely helped her to become more a part of the class.
I want you to write a question for Ashley. I want you to... Okay, I'm going to give you a marker. We need to try to help her figure out if the new ramp is going to have more or less. So, will the new ramp have more or less effort?
A more or B less? I'm not sure what the answer is.
She will work with her peers, and she will also be able to go around to different lab stations. So she is capable of learning grade level content as it's relevant. Having students like Ashley with severe disabilities in my classroom benefits every student because they see what the real world is like. They're going to be out in society with people who have different challenges than them. But the more that you are exposed to people with different challenges, different disabilities, the more you're able to show compassion and to help each other out.
That is an opinion, but Daniel gets to share his.
I'm a word person. I feel great when we're all reading and discussing and writing papers. That feels super comfortable to me. But it's not successful for all my students, so I need to disrupt that for myself.
Now, right before we sample it, Mick, tell everybody what is it that you need to be able to do by the end of class today?
I can describe the process of milk turning into yogurt through fermentation.
Okay. Here is a job that I need. I need every person in this room to get a plastic cup.
Within any single day, you'll have a variety of access points for the content. And I do find that it deepens engagement for gen ed kids, for special education kids, for all different kinds of students, because there's more to do. Like, we got to keep it moving. Otherwise, it gets really boring. So it's trying to find a way where there's something that's video, where there's something that's audio, where there's something that's visual, where there's something that's read. It is about that many paths, many paths.
Floating around. Nobody's connected to anybody else. Floating around. We're floating around. Now make 1 milk protein. 1 milk protein.
I really learned how important it was to introduce more visual cues for my students who are English language learners, where you do an action related to vocabulary or related to a concept.
We're going to stretch out, stretch out.
The learning gains that I saw for my ELL learners were so huge when I started to disrupt a purely language-based and word-based type of instruction.
But what do I want now? Connect. Connect.
It matters less to me how we arrive somewhere. What matters to me is that a student develops the conceptual understanding around something.
Get tiny, get tight, get small. You're a tiny, tight little milk protein.
I just saw my students really be able to shine. It was beautiful to watch.
Okay.
Whatever it takes.
Who can tell me what we have been discussing in social studies? What's one thing this week we have learned about? Jeremiah, do you remember? Great job. What's that big question? Community. My classroom is very diverse and the abilities are very diverse. The diversity has definitely improved my teaching. We're getting ready to start group work. You know, in your group, you do not get out of your seat without permission. Thank you. Great job. We have to make sure we do what? Stay on task. Stay on. I have learned different ways of approaching every learning style. Data affects the way that I plan or lead my instruction because it helps me to know exactly what my students' weaknesses are and what their strengths are. I will take their weaknesses and that's what I will emphasize more and elaborate on or decide to go back and reteach and use my centers to teach those different lessons in small groups. The students in my centers today were in different groups based on their learning styles and their instructional reports. Every day at 2:30, another worker at the school, they come in to keep the rest of my class while I take those 4 students out just to work on what they need the most help in, reading literature and reading informational text and using story elements, who, what, when, where, why, and how questions can really help them to understand what is being read in that text. Now that's a good evidence. She said when that truck came by, what did Tammy do?
She ducked her head and tail in.
And who has a shell?
That's her.
Right, because do we walk around with shells on?
No.
So we know.
I said, okay, these interventions has to be done. I will be responsible for assigning a custodian to go keep your class every day for 30 minutes so that you can make sure these interventions are being done.
And what have we been talking about the wild animals? What have they been doing? Helping their babies, how they protect their babies. Okay, we're going to go over, we're going to review.
Children come to us at different levels, varying levels, with different disabilities. I truly believe and practice as a teacher that all children can learn. They may not be able to learn at the same time, at the same rate, the same way.
But what is that letter, buddy? D. And what sound does that D make? Duh. Very nice.
District-wide, we're implementing a multi-tiered system of support. We talk about what's working at the schools, what are some of the issues and concerns, and what helps drive some of those conversations. Working with SWIFT, those climate surveys and parent surveys, we're able to glean that data and make some decisions about what do we need to do as a district to make parents feel more involved. And so whatever it takes for our children to learn, that's what we're going to do.
Set the bar high.
The way I look at differentiation is providing access to the content. So the first thing I do is ask myself, what's the goal of the lesson? If the goal of the lesson is for them to understand the history of Oregon, I don't care if they read it, if they write it, if they listen to it, or if they research it. Once I get most of my students settled after the mini lesson, I then pull a small group to the carpet. These students particularly struggle with reading. And since I was wanting to assess their comprehension, I let them listen to the story on tape. And so we listened to a chapter, and then we stopped and we talked about it, and we focused just really specifically on the characters. What type of kid is Bradley? Look at me. Look at me.
He's a bad kid. He's a bad. He's bad like me.
There's no such thing as a bad kid, but there are such things as making bad choices. Does Bradley make bad choices?
Yes.
For them, I really wanted to set a very specific goal so that they could show me their successes without having to struggle through their weaknesses. What normally happens if you break something of somebody else's?
In deep trouble.
Yeah.
Big, really big trouble.
Absolutely. I do a lot of speech to text too, so the kids are able to verbalize what they want to say, and then the application will write it for them. But generally, you really have to think about what is that goal, and then how can you remove those roadblocks that the kids are struggling through. Josephine, let me see your picture. Good job. I focus on building a really strong community so that the kids automatically help one another, and that's a universal resource that the kids use every day, all the time.
With the kids with disabilities, they were kind of in their own class, and they only came in for like the special things. But now they're in our class all the time. They got a little less problems than that we did on our homework sometimes, and the tests were a little bit different, but that's it. But it's really fun when we were all together.
Oh boy, here we go. Here we go.
My friends are Sarah, Isabel, and Elizabeth. They're fun, and then they're nice, and then they care about me.
If we look back at the data table, we can find 90 decibels at typical factory work. And how long can she listen to 90 decibels for safely, according to our graph? 8 hours.
If I don't know how to spell a word, then they help me to spell it.
How long is the typical work shift? 8 hours. 8 hours, so she's right on the edge. I've read the research that students who get involved in helping others get more motivated and also have better knowledge acquisition. I know for my own practice that when I teach a subject, I do have to learn it better myself, and so the fact of teaching it to another person, or in a class of kids in my case, is itself a way of learning that's very, very effective.
Maybe for the kids to bring them to work.
Very good. HZ is short for Hertz. Does anybody know what Hertz means?
Is the biggest school to be at?
I love the idea of inclusion because it really does set the bar high for all kids. You know, we all have different abilities and we all have different strengths, and being around people who are different than us allows us to grow every single day, and the possibilities are endless.
Okay, let's do this with some movement. Take your list. You've been identifying components from that video. I'm going to put 3 minutes on the clock, 1 minute per person. You're going to find somebody you've not talked with yet today. Share with them one component you saw evidenced in the video. Share with them what you think the evidence is that that component is probably at least developing, if not fully in place. Okay? 1 minute per person. You're going to share 3 components. Go ahead and find somebody you haven't talked with yet today and share your first component. The data team, making decisions with data within that data team, right? They were looking at that continuous improvement. Which stuff is effective for us, which is not? Let's stop doing the stuff that's not working and let's do more of the stuff that makes the difference. Great one. I had that one too. Okay. Let's get that one off right there. Number 10. Great. What's another one?
Knowing your population, just in the beginning that they know that they're working with a low socioeconomic.
Great. So component number 5, looking at that differentiation, universal design for learning, prioritized approaches aligned to the population that we have at hand. Another component.
The variety of the learning. Some were reading, some were listening, some were doing some hands-on. They have a good variety.
Great. So on that same component, we had that multiple paths, multiple access points, as well as the attention to the high effect teaching. Lots of evidence of component number 5. Nice catch. Another component. So students setting their own goals and knowing where they're going, that's actually considered high effect teaching. That's one of those high effect sizes, right? It's related with high expectations, but it's of students being able to set those expectations and then exceed them, right? That's what we want to do with them. We want them to have set some good goals, and then we want to support them to exceed those goals. High effect teaching. Great. One last component. Yes, Matt. And then we'll come back to Stacy. Yeah, looks like they've got some universal support there that's really shared expectations across the entire system. Great catch. Nice one. And Stacy?
Number 7, the additional instruction, like having the custodian come with the rest of the class so the teacher goes.
Great, I had that one as well. So component number 7, looking at the additional support system, she had that group that she was pulling out for reading instruction, right? And then she was also referring to those who needed some extra help. So there's some evidence that something's going on for an additional support system there. Great, nice.
Component number 2, with the leadership being involved, the buy-in from the leadership.
Great, so number 2 had some evidence around buy-in from leadership. We were hearing from district leaders, one who was talking about developing one system for all children, and then another one who was talking about bringing in that parent survey data, the multiple stakeholders' input and information into the leadership decision making. Nice catch. Great. Number 2 as well was evidence there. Anybody see evidence of number 6? All students being included? You got that one. Great. Check. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 5 of the components that we saw just in that short video. So these are pretty dense videos. I saw evidence of at least 4 other components within that video. So they're worth a review. I think about the videos in the same way I think about reading. We're reading for different purposes on different days. I might watch these same videos for different purposes on different days with different training groups. You can take one and really unpack it in a number of different ways. Did you see anything in the videos that we've not mentioned yet within the components of MTSS? Yes? There was a lot of mention of learning styles, and I tried to edit out every phrase that they actually said learning styles, but I obviously did not catch them all. Teaching to learning styles itself does not have a strong evidence base. Incorporating in multiple pathways for presentation, representation, response modes does. But learning styles as a bounded practice doesn't have the same evidence base. But if we incorporate it into presentation response, now we're getting somewhere. So yeah, lots of discussion of it. Thinking about how we leverage it is really important. Great. Nice catch. Yes?
I like how the one school has a data wall with the data and then they move them up and down according to where they work. I thought it was a good visual aid and to see everybody on one screen where they fall into place.
Really gives you an idea of what's the picture of strengths and support needs within our building, right? To see all the kids on one wall. The struggle there, for me, is you'd have to have multiple walls for various content areas, right, in order to really get that nuanced picture. And as long as the door's closed and locked, I'm good with it. But if any other kids can get in there and see that, I've got some concerns. But I love that they're kind of looking at the entirety, the full body of evidence that they have about their kids. Great. Any other things that you picked up on?
I love the bike in the classroom.
The bike in the classroom.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. And what was he doing while riding the bike? He was working. He was taking notes. Yeah. Yeah. Great. Yeah, she loves her words. And what was her phrase? I have to disrupt that. Yes, I love the way that's some pretty reflective practice going on there. Yeah. Yeah. Imagine what that culture will be like in your schools if you don't already have it. Right? If we could all get together as teachers and talk about, well, here's the stuff that really kind of goes with my style that I like, and maybe more about me than my kiddos. Right? And she's really transparent about that and figuring that out. Got to appreciate that. Nice catch. Anything else that you saw that you'd want to kind of put out to the group? Nice catches. Good eyes. All right. If for either of the videos that I've shown you together or whatever it takes, if you're interested in further dialogue, different slices and ways to look at the videos, we do have discussion guides on our website that we encourage you to kind of go check out at swiftschools.org/shelf. On our Swift shelf, you'll be able to find them there. I think they're under the new releases right now, but they'll get moved around. So let's talk a little bit about how did they get there? Like, did they just show up at that place? What's the how part of their work? So this morning I talked about the importance of paying attention to those effective practices, but then also having that implementation strategy with it. So what's the how of the work that they're doing? How are they getting these things in place to move an entire culture? Not just have class by class, teacher by teacher, but to shift an entire culture of a school. What's going on there? And at its heart, our how approach includes a core set of 6 practices that we support our schools and districts to engage in order to lead the implementation effort. So if you're looking at your MTSS practice profile and you're saying that leadership piece, here's what we're teaching those teams to use and leverage in their work. 1, looking at who's on the team and how they're coming together and what their communication is with the team in the next level over. So if I'm in a school leadership team, how am I communicating with my district team? What data do I need to be sharing with them? And what support am I expecting in response? And how is that functioning as a two-way communication system in the teaming process? So what are my district team's expectations of my school leadership team in terms of what they would like to be seeing for data and communication? And what support do they need in response from us as well, along with the feedback? So the teaming is that connection across those distributed leadership structures in various arenas of the system. Districts then have connections over with state teams to have conversations about what's working and what needs to change. We, of course, leverage coaching in all of our work. As I said, I think already twice today, and say it one more time. Coaching makes that big difference from direct instruction training to then using it in the workplace. Right? If you want to see the practice in job embedded, then give the coaching as job embedded. You'll shift your implementation rates from 10 to 15% up to 85 to 95% implementation. The difference is job embedded coaching. Now that can look like a variety of things. It does not have to look like Jim Knight's instructional coaching model. That is one of your options, which I tend to love. It can also be other peer collaboration, mentoring programs, professional learning communities that have real focus on professional, deprivatizing the professional practice in our classrooms, right? Becoming transparent and open with that. Worked with one of our schools who were really interested in finding out which different teachers were doing which things really well. So we went through and inventoried what instructional practices teachers felt they were doing really well at. We made sure we had agreed upon essential elements that we were looking for. And then they agreed to videotape themselves and share it at a variety of staff meetings. So that if I was really interested in what Stephanie was doing, I could follow up with her and learn from her in her practice. Right? So I would see it on video and say, oh gosh, when I do it, it really doesn't look anything like that. And she's getting much higher effect. Let me talk with her some more. Right? So setting up those job-embedded conversations, Really important part of this. We do it a lot with these 6 practices. So how can I help teams in a job-embedded fashion look at data differently, design their future differently? So let me go to that part of the work, because this inner part really is just a continuous improvement, plan, do, study, act model, if you will. So we'll start often with our teams by looking forward. And the question I'll usually ask teams for the visioning work or the designing of their future is to ask them, what's your ideal school? If you were to design your ideal school from the perspective of students, the perspective of the teachers and staff members, family members, administrators, what's the design of your ideal school? You're building a new house, what's the design of your ideal kitchen? Right? What do you want this to look like when we're done? That increases the likelihood of you getting there. Where do you want to go on vacation? Well, saying where you want to go is going to help you get there. That's the first part of it. So we want to identify the destination. Design. And we try to build consensus around that design. So I'll work with school teams, district teams, to then figure out what do we agree on from all these ideas that we have about our ideal school. What's common amongst our entire faculty, staff, and family members and community members? In one district, we brought together leaders across 3 different schools. They had 2 feeder elementary schools and 1 middle school within their district, and then they had a shared high school across multiple towns. So we first focused within just Charlestown, New Hampshire. Brought together leaders across the schools, and they answered that question individually at their tables. What's my ideal North Charlestown Community School? What's my ideal Charlestown Elementary School? What's my ideal Charlestown Middle School? Each team generated their ideal set of descriptors. We then had them put them on the wall across the 3 schools, and looking across the 3 schools, are there things that are in common? Those then become feeders for the district level conversation. What's our ideal district? Well, it includes these indicators across the school level. Those leaders then brought together the rest of the faculty staff to take a look at the indicators and build agreement across 3 schools of what they wanted as their ideal. So out of their 80-some odd indicators that they started with, by the end of the activity, about a half of a day's worth of work, we had a core set of a little over 40 descriptive statements about what their ideal school would be across 3 different schools. Now we've really focused our effort. We've got high agreement and higher momentum in the effort as well. If we all agree on the destination, we're more likely to get there. So design work is descriptive work. It's not just coming up with another big, broad vision statement, very descriptive statements. And then having the consensus around it. Data is the way we understand where we are relative to that design. So looking at our current data, our current student outcome data, looking at our current school climate and culture data, looking at our fidelity, our implementation status data, what's the status of the stuff that we're trying to implement right now, and looking at our capacity data. What's our capacity to lead change? So there are specific tools that are capacity assessments that we'll use in districts. One of them is called, oddly enough, the District Capacity Assessment that has 26 indicators on it that are seen as important for district central offices to have in place in order to fully support schools in their change efforts. And then we're just going back and forth. This is the macro improvement cycle. Here's what the data is telling us right now. Here's what's going on. There's where we want to be. Now let's figure out the next best priority for us to work on. How many of you have school improvement plans with more than 5 goals in them? It's okay. Many of you do. How many of you have more than 3 goals in your school improvement plan? Many of you do. We encourage our schools to come out with anywhere from 1 to 3 priorities for a given year. A priority is a big area that you want to move change in. So it may be our additional support system around behavior stuff. Like we have nothing in place. We're doing great in reading and math, but we know so little about our kids in terms of behavior and social emotional learning. So we need to increase what we're doing there and integrate it in. That would be a priority area. We don't have any prioritized standards in our building. We've looked at the state document and we appreciate their input, and now we would like to have our own conversation about that. Okay, that would be a huge endeavor to take on. We want to roll out a new core reading curriculum this year. That's a big priority, right? So think about the big long-term change efforts as a set of priorities. 1 to 3 of those max. And then there may be stuff that are more action steps. They're like low-hanging fruit. If I make these small changes, I can get some big effect within the next 3 months. We don't have a family member on our school leadership team. That's an action step. Who do you know? Let's get into the table. Let's get something started here. Right? That's an action step. That's not we need a 5-page plan to go do that. Right? So we want to identify a few really important priorities and some action steps. And then we figure out what are the resources that are best matched to help us get those priorities in place. Let's develop some detailed action plans and figure out what's the best allocation of resources. And we bring our schools and districts through a process of thinking very creatively about resources, which starts with figuring out what's in common locally that you want to get in place. You know, in working with Allegheny County schools in Western Maryland, just about into West Virginia, they had never come to a table where they had a cross-school conversation about what's important for them for change. So we brought them together. 4 schools came together, because those were the ones we were working with, out of 26 I think they have in their county. And when they put their priorities up, they had a lot of stuff in common that they wanted to do. And some schools wanted to do things that other schools already had in place. And what immediately happened was rather simple and rather remarkable. One school was doing really well in math. Another school wanted to do better with that same math program. The building that was doing well said, well, why don't you borrow our school math coach, because he's pretty awesome, and we'll loan him to you for some of your startup work. You're doing really well on behavior check-in, check-out, and we're not. Can you give us some support on that? Nobody spent any money. And we had 2 massive training endeavors underway, just within the district. Now, had they been doing it on their own, their dollars for their school improvement plans would have gone to hiring outside consultants. They would have been reinventing the wheels in their buildings. Right? So what's the most efficient use of our resources here, and how can we leverage those? All the schools acknowledged we're not getting enough job-embedded instructional coaching for particular high-effect instructional approaches. So the district started doing some development work around that, instead of individual schools trying to figure out how we were going to leverage our budgets to hire individual school-level coaches. Right? Became a district-wide conversation. So that's part of this resource conversation with the priorities. And then it's a matter of plugging along in your improvement cycle. Where are we at? What's our next action step? When do we need to get in place? What are the resources for that? Coming back around and monitoring the plan. At the end of the year, taking stock of your current reality, going back out to say what your big, bold design was, enhancing that based on now what you know, and then coming back to your data to say what's the next best step to get us there. Then it's just trudging through and updating annually. Questions about that cycle? It's rather straightforward, but there are some particular nuances in there. If you're interested in using these tools, they're all available on our website. So if you go to swiftschools.org/playbook, or if you just go to the swiftschools.org and you click on playbook, it will bring you to a page that gives you, for each of the 6 practices, learn it materials, use it materials, and check and coach it materials. So if you really want to learn more about priority and practice planning, there's some teaching materials there for you. If you've now learned enough that you want to go try it out, click on the Use It Now materials, and you can download forms and files that will guide you through it. If you then want to improve your use of it, download the Check and Coach It materials and start checking how you're using it. So we've got administration guides for each of the 6 practices. We support all of our school and district leadership teams to use these and become really skilled at them, so that we're not in a school leadership team talking about the upcoming field trip. Right? That can go to a different committee. If your school leadership team is talking about those kinds of things, we need to shape the agenda. Get them back onto leading the big endeavor here. Okay. Many of you have already done this next part, so I'm just going to reference it, and then I'm going to move to the wrap-up for the day. And for those of you who want to stay and do the self-assessment, I'll circulate and support you to do the self-assessment. Oh, sorry, wait a second. Before I do that, I need to hand out these indicators, because I told you I would tell you my special sauce. Just take one and pass it along there. So we've, in cooperation with folks at the Indiana IEP Resource Center, we went through and culled some of our SWIFT materials to identify a set of readiness indicators. Let me back up here. Like, where do you start with this work? Right? Like, we're really interested in implementing more of MTSS within our building. Where do we start? This is the document that you start with. Now, the first set of indicators are really about learning about SWIFT, but you would put in there anything it is that you want to learn about that you're trying to implement. Then there's a set of district and school leadership readiness indicators, a combined set, and those are about the will for change. Those are about commitment to the change process and what it's going to take. We look at readiness through two lenses. One lens is will, the desire, the commitment to the change process. The other lens is capacity to lead that change process. So first, do you want to, and then are you positioned to do it? So the first bucket there are those combined will and commitment indicators. And then there are kind of two buckets after that. One's a set of district level indicators, the other school level indicators. And those are about the teaming structures, decision-making authority, communication plans. So when we start our work, we start in that first column of the practice profile, the first section of the practice profile, are on the integrated teams with an eye toward leadership. And we started the last section, the decisions with data, that are relative to leading the change process. So we start from the outside in. Our district and school leadership teams positioned with the will and capacity to lead change. Now, the Indiana IEP Resource Center staff can work with you to get these indicators in place. And again, as I said on page 2, item number 1, you don't necessarily have to be implementing the full SWIFT framework. Your commitment could be to MTSS or any given particular profile. What's important out of indicator 1 is that you're learning about it and you actually want to pursue it. So their staff can help you work with that to get that in place. That's where we start, is the teaming piece. Will and capacity to lead the change endeavor. From there, on any given MTSS practice profile, once we've got the teams in place to lead it, and they're clear on the decisions they need to make for the last section, we say, what's your data infrastructure look like? Do you have the data systems that you would need for making the key decisions that you as a leadership team will have to make in this process? Like, can you sit at a table and look at data that will allow you to determine which instructional and intervention approaches are higher effect and which ones are not? Like, are you positioned for that conversation? If not, let's build that infrastructure for you first, so that when you get to the table to make the decisions, you're not frustrated. So get the leadership teams, make sure they understand the decisions that they've got to make, build the data infrastructure for it. Then we go back to universal. In universal, how are we doing? And we get those universal indicators in place, and the decision-making items related to universal. Then it's your judgment call. I tend to then want to go to intensive and then back up to additional. But it depends on what the local data is suggesting. Right? So I might support a school to get a couple of things in place in additional, like check-in, check-out, and some quick, easy reading math area interventions, and then back out to intensified. But the reason we work on universal first is so that you're not trying to intervene your way out of a challenge. Right? If your data shows you that 38% of your kids are not hitting your benchmarks in reading or math or science, you can't intervene your way out of that. There's a problem with the core instructional approaches that are happening. Do we not have a coherent curriculum? Are we not using high-effect strategies? Are we not focused on the right set of prioritized standards? Right? That's a universal problem. Right? So if we're up to 70 to 80% of kids are responding, okay, then maybe we're ready to take a look at the other systems. But otherwise, we're developing an intervention system at additional or intensified support that really isn't the profile of students we're going to be having in a couple of years if we get a solid universal foundation. So you could then, what I like to do is I then will bump out to intensified support, and I will say, what are the profiles of students that have the most intensive needs in this given building, and what do we need to build for them? And then work my way back in. Would typically, kind of theoretically, how I would be doing it. But it has to be dependent on the local data. So, readiness for change, those set of indicators. Build your school and district leadership teams. Make sure they're clear about the decisions they have to make. Then come back to universal. Build that first. Get it solid. Then work both ends in. Okay. Questions about that? That's our basic theory of change. That's how we go about our work within the center. And again, acknowledging if your local data says otherwise, then we choose a different path. Or if the school says, no, we absolutely want to start with additional, and nobody's on board with starting with universal, then we're going to start with additional. But that's going to be because of momentum issues, not necessarily because of our recommendation, but we're going to be in it with you. Okay. So that was the special sauce. MTSS self-assessment. If you've already done it for your school or building, great. Kudos to you. If you now would also like to bring that back and get your full team to do it, here's a process that we recommend using. It will get you through the assessment without getting sidetracked by a bunch of conversations that are probably really important to have at some point, but it will never allow you to finish the actual scoring process. So, once you're seated as a group, read a component item all the way across. And then have individuals, for example, write the number 1, 0.5, or 0, according to the scoring criteria here, onto a paddle or use their fingers. And then say, ready, set, vote, and have everybody share their numbers all at once. Right? That's key because you're going to have authority issues in the dynamic. Everybody's going to be like, I don't want to share my number until I see what the principal wrote. I don't want to share my number until I know what Stephanie wrote because she'll beat me up if I don't give the right answer. Right? So whatever those authority or power dynamics are, you can get out of that by having everybody read it and then you say, ready, set, show your number. Okay? And then if everybody has the same number, you just circle that, don't discuss it, move to the next one. If you've got clear majority, it's only Jan who has a different number, everybody else is on board, just ask Jan, are you okay for scoring purposes? If we scored it as this, and we'll return later to have a conversation. If she's okay with that, then score it and move on. But if you've got a split down the middle here, 3 to 2, 2 to 3, we probably have to have a conversation to resolve where it is. And then you wash, rinse, repeat. Go on to the next one, do the same process. At the end, when you go to do your scoring, as I said, we missed a major typo. There are only 14 items, not 15. Oh my gosh. But we had already had these printed, so we're just letting you edit your page. So on page 7 of 7, the scoring rubric at the bottom here, in the second column, there's a number 15. Change that to a 14. And at the bottom of the next column, it says 15 times 100. That should be 14 times 100. Right? So it's X out of 14 times 100 to get your percentage in place. Okay. These are all tools that we'll have posted on our website, so you'll be able to get the corrected version for your use. And the downloadables are usually fillable forms, so you can actually fill in your scores and then update them regularly if you're interested. Okay. Last section that's built into your handout is built in as a resource. For those of you who feel like, you know what, I'm really ready to move to the next level, we have a tool that's called the Starter Kit. And it's going to focus your attention on taking an inventory of your resources, your people resources, your space resources, your material resources. It's got in there sample schedules, and it has in there a thing called the tiered intervention matrix, which is kind of our special sauce as far as tools go. The tiered intervention matrix, which the information for starts on page 25 of your PowerPoint, is a downloadable, fillable form that allows you to take an inventory of all your core curricula, instructional approaches, your intervention sets for additional and intensified support. Allows you to write down when you expect those to be used, under what conditions, with whom, for what purposes, so that you can keep track of your whole system and then be able to look at those individually to say, are we getting the effect we should out of that? If so, we'll keep it. If not, let's get rid of that and replace it with something better. So all those series of pages do is kind of give you little descriptions of what should go in that portion of the form. Now, once you download it from our website, you're going to have larger written directions. But I wanted to give you enough to see, for you to be able to check it out to see, yeah, I want to go to the website and download that or not. So, tiered intervention matrix. For your homework enjoyment over the weekend, we've put together a little Swift website scavenger hunt for you. And what's intended is if you answer these questions, if you find the answers on the website, you will have oriented yourself to our website. It's rather massive. I remember Jolly called me one day and she's like, can you virtually join one of our staff meetings and kind of bring our staff members through the website? And I'm like, sure. It took an hour to just give them the overview of the website. And their heads were about to pop at the end of it. It was just so much information. And of course, I get so excited about it. Because I'm like, your tax dollars paid for this, and now you can go use it here. Ask it a question. It's more than a magic 8-ball. So, you know, like in the Swift Guide section, it's like pick a topic that you're interested in learning about and hit the search button. There's tons of information there. There are online training videos, there are implementation guides, checklists, quick tips, you name it. There's recorded webinars that we have. We do a monthly topical webinar series. Those are there. There are blogs if you're more like, I need a one-page chatty piece on this. That's a good way to start my Saturday. We have those as well. And then if you're more of a listener, we have a podcast series. So we think there's something there for every learning style, and you can poke around and see what works for you topically as well. And this scavenger hunt will get you through the website. Now, you could just blow the whole learning process and go to page 3 and notice that the answer key is there. It's like doing the jumble puzzle in the newspaper. You could turn to the next page and just look up the answer. Just letting you know. Okay. Let's process the day, shall we? We tend to process with 2 broad questions. What worked and what enhancements do you have? And since we're doing this session again next Wednesday, I'd like a little feedback because we put together a different arrangement than we've done before. So let me first check with you by saying what worked today in terms of the content that we covered and the processes that we used for instruction. What was kind of productive for you? You like the videos? Okay, brings it together for you. Great.
Great facilitation techniques.
Great facilitation. Go on. Those were all co-constructed with the team back there, so I would love to take credit for all of it, but it's not all mine. Great. So kind of the interactive stuff. Okay, great. Ooh, lots of supportive nods on that one. Okay. Other things that worked, content or process-wise?
I like
The what? The quizzes. That's helpful to you? Okay. I wasn't sure if it was too much, but it really helps me to do the reteach in a strategic way. If I just open it up to Q&A, sometimes one or two people can kind of run the room. So it's helpful to have the data to drive me on that one. Okay, great. I'll keep doing the Kahoots. Anything else? Was bingo okay? Too long? It's okay, a little long? Yeah. Right. The intent is to kind of do the overview enough so that you can then read them and say, all right, I think I get it. Okay. All right. So always looking for efficiency on bingo. All right. Any enhancements to the content or the process you could improve this by? Totally open. I don't take it personal.
You might highlight your books, the books that you gave out. That was really nice to receive the book. You might just kind of talk about what are the key features or why you selected those.
Okay. Okay, we can do that.
So that I knew which one to pick.
What were the key features in each book before you picked them so that you would know the choice you were making? You want to make informed decisions? What the heck?
Which one would apply to general education?
Takes all the fun out of it, but okay. Note to self. We actually, so I'll turn to Matt. It might be nice for us to make a little blurb for the different books so that people actually could read and make that informed choice. Let me just passing that one off. Good idea, Matt. Anything else that could enhance the experience for you, aside from the temperature? Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I saw that too. Yeah. They should have been numbered. So maybe when we start doing that segment, I'll just walk everybody through and number the items to start with. Okay, great. And I also want to, when I do that recheck for if you have questions, I kind of want to put in the activity guide 1 through 14 so that you can write in the activity guide which ones you're understanding, and then use that same chart for looking for evidence back in the videos. So I will just end on a big old thank you. Thank you for your hospitality today. Thank you for your engagement. Thank you for your endurance. Really impressive.